Have you ever thought about like how fast the skills we learn just
Hmm.
become obsolete?
Yeah.
It's kind of crazy when you realize that in the 2020s, the average shelf life for professional skill
Hmm.
is less than 2 years.
Wow.
That's like what you learned in school becoming outdated before you even finish paying off those student loans.
Right.
Makes you wonder if education systems are keeping up.
It's a question a lot of people are thinking about right now, for
Heck
sure.
yeah. Well, that brings us to your request for this deep dive Nepal's education system. You're interested in whether it's doing enough to prepare students for this, rapidly changing world.
Yeah.
We've got some really interesting sources for this deep dive. We're focusing mainly on a recent conference by PABSON,
Okay.
a prominent private school association in Nepal,
Hmm.
and an opinion piece by N.D. Lama, a parent who's been pretty vocal about the need for education reform.
Yeah, it seems like he's not afraid to share his opinions. He even pulled his daughter out of higher secondary school because he just felt like the system wasn't working for her.
Wow, that's a strong statement. Sounds like he's got some skin in the game.
Yeah.
Before we get to his perspective, though, can you give us a little context on PABSON and this conference they held?
Yeah, so PABSON stands for Private and Boarding Schools Organization of Nepal.
Okay.
They have a big influence in Nepal's education system. Their recent international conference brought together government officials, educators, and other people involved in education.
Okay, so we have this big conference going on.
Right.
And we also have N.D. Lama saying that the system's failing.
Yeah.
What's the connection between the two?
Well, this is where things get interesting.
Okay.
The education minister, Vidya Patarai, and a chairperson for a key committee both spoke at this conference. But they seem to be focusing on things like scholarship provisions and how complicated the school education bill is.
So more of a focus on the existing system
Mm.
rather than big picture change.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that's a big issue for ND Lama.
Got it.
He says there's a huge resistance to change
Mhm.
within the education system.
Mm-hmm.
He actually uses this metaphor of people stuck in a cave who are happy with things as they are.
A cave? I'm intrigued.
He says it's like people are so used to the darkness of the cave that they fight against anyone trying to bring light from outside.
Oh, wow.
He even talks about people trying to build something new outside the cave,
Mhm.
only to have those clinging to the darkness burn it down.
That's some pretty intense imagery.
It is.
I could see how that would resonate with parents and educators who feel like no one is listening when they ask for changes.
Yeah.
So if I'm understanding correctly, Lama sees these things, the government's focusing on scholarships and legal issues,
Yeah.
as just symptoms of this bigger problem,
Right.
this resistance to really rethinking education.
Exactly. He thinks that instead of listening to new ideas and working with private schools, the government is more worried about control and making everyone follow the rules.
Interesting. And where does his own experience trying to get his son exempted from the C exam fit into all this?
So that's a great question, and it kind of shows how these big problems affect people on an individual level.
Mm.
Now, the C, or secondary education examination, is a really important test in Nepal.
Right.
All students take it at the end of grade 10.
Got it.
Lama's argument is that these kinds of tests just focus too much on memorizing things, and they don't assess the skills kids will need in the real world.
I think a lot of our listeners can relate to that feeling of standardized tests not measuring anything important. It sounds like his critique of the C is part of a much bigger conversation about what education is really for.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And to his credit, he is offering solutions, not just complaints.
Right.
He points to countries like Finland, which give schools a lot of freedom with their curriculums,
Mm.
and Singapore, which has a system that balances public and private education better, as models that Nepal could learn from. He's giving specific examples of how things could be different.
That's great. So he's not just saying things should change. He's
No.
giving concrete ways they could change.
Right.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's what makes his perspective so interesting. You know, he's not just complaining, he's actually giving us a way to move forward.
So let's get into this roadmap. Where does he suggest we start?
Well, first he talks about decentralization.
Okay.
He believes that schools should have more control over what they teach and how they teach it, instead of being stuck with this rigid national curriculum. That way they can create programs that really work for the students and the communities they are in.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, a school in a rural part of Nepal probably faces very different challenges and has different opportunities than a school in Kathmandu.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's why he also talks about changing these rigid exam systems.
Yeah.
He really criticizes exams like that C everyone takes at the end of grade 10,
Right.
he feels that they just focus way too much on memorization,
Yeah.
and don't really measure things like critical thinking or problem solving, all those important skills you need in the real world.
I bet a lot of our listeners, no matter where they live, can relate to that feeling of taking standardized tests that didn't feel like they were testing anything that mattered. It sounds like Lama's critique of the C exam is actually getting at this bigger question about what the purpose of education even is.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And he goes on to say that these high-pressure exams that try to fit everyone into the same box should be replaced with more adaptable ways of assessing students.
Okay.
He wants assessments that look at the skills that employers actually need. Things like being able to work with others, being able to communicate well, and being able to think creatively,
Yeah.
you know?
It sounds like he's talking about taking a more holistic approach to evaluating students, recognizing that intelligence and being good at something can look a lot of different ways.
Right.
What do you think about this listener? Did you feel like your education valued different ways of learning, or was it more about passing tests and checking boxes? But Lama doesn't stop there.
No, he doesn't.
Yeah.
He also talks about the importance of giving teachers the tools and support they need, better training, more resources,
Yeah.
and the freedom to try new teaching methods.
That's so important. I've had some really great teachers who were so passionate about their subjects and had these amazing ways of making learning fun,
Yeah.
but they always seemed like they were fighting against outdated textbooks and strict rules.
It's something a lot of teachers deal with, and that's why it's important to have systems in place that let teachers be creative and adapt to what their students need.
Absolutely. And Lama doesn't just focus on primaries and secondary school. He also thinks higher education needs to be more flexible with things like online courses and more options for when you can take classes so that it's easier for students who have jobs or other responsibilities to go to college. This is where it gets really interesting to me. He's not talking about making little changes to the existing system.
Yeah.
He's suggesting a whole new way to think about the role of public and private education. He says that instead of seeing private schools as competition, the government should be working with them
Right.
and seeing them as a valuable part of the education system.
That's right. He's challenging those in charge to move away from that stay-in-the-cave way of thinking and see that private schools can be a part of making things better, not something to be controlled.
It seems pretty logical, right? I mean, if you're really serious about improving education for all of Nepal's students,
Yeah.
you can't just ignore or push aside a big part of the system.
Yeah.
You have to find ways to work together.
Absolutely. Now, it's important to point out that Lama understands the challenges. He knows there are valid concerns about how to ensure quality and make sure everyone has access to good education in the private school system.
Right.
But he truly believes that by working together, the government and private schools can make education better and more fair for all students.
So it's great that he's offering solutions, but I think what everyone's thinking is, how does all this apply to me?
Right.
If we look at the bigger picture, what's happening in Nepal is kind of a small version of a problem everyone's facing.
Okay.
This fast-paced change in technology and the fact that skills become outdated so quickly are things happening all over the world.
So even if we aren't directly involved with Nepal's education system, these themes of being able to adapt and needing an education system that's more focused on the future
Right.
are relevant to all of us.
Absolutely. Whether you're a student, a parent, an educator, or just someone who cares about the future, this deep dive has some important takeaways. What Lama's saying about needing a more flexible education system, one that can adapt and that focuses on skills, is something that applies everywhere, not just in Nepal. It really makes you think that we all need to be constantly learning and updating our skills to keep up with the changes.
Exactly. And that brings up a question for all of us.
What's that?
Thinking about all these changes, what skills or knowledge do you think are most important for succeeding in a world where technology and jobs are always changing?
That's a tough one. It's easy to get caught up in all the hype about needing specific technical skills.
Oh,
But what Lama is saying makes me think that those transferable skills are really important,
right.
the ones that you can use in different fields and industries.
Yeah. Technical skills are definitely important, but they're not the only thing. We already mentioned critical thinking and problem solving, but there's also being able to adapt, being resilient, learning new things quickly, and working well with all kinds of people. Those are the skills that will make people stand out in a world that's constantly changing.
So even if we could somehow know what the jobs of the future will be, which we can't,
Right.
being able to learn and adapt would still be the most valuable thing you could have.
I think you're exactly right. It's about moving away from that old idea that education is about stuffing your head with facts and more about learning how to learn and grow. That's what will help people deal with the unknown and succeed in a world that's always changing.
That's a really great point, and I think it applies to everyone no matter where they are in their own learning journey. It's never too late to be curious, question what you think you know, and look for different points of view.
And maybe if we encourage that in ourselves and in younger generations, we can start building education systems that really prepare people for whatever the future holds, not just for the world as it is today.
That's a really inspiring thought and something we can all work towards. So, as you go about your day, listener, think about your own experiences with education. What worked well for you, what didn't work so well, and what changes, even small ones, could you suggest in your own community? Even things that seem small, like talking to your school board or mentoring someone, can make a difference.
And remember, this conversation doesn't end here. We'll continue to explore these themes of education and skill development in future deep dives.
So until next time, stay curious, keep learning, and let's work together to create a future where everyone can reach their full potential through education.